Miscoll with EMSNOW, and welcome to this edition of EMSNOW Up Close. My guest today is Misha Govshteyn, the CEO of MacroFab. MacroFab is a very interesting company in our electronics industry, and we had some news this week about some new funding that was just closed. But before we get into those questions, let me welcome Misha to the show and ask him to introduce himself and give an overview of exactly who MacroFab is. Misha?
Thank you, Eric. I think it's my second time around, so
yes, it is.
Good to be back. As you mentioned, my name is Misha Govshteyn. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of MacroFab, and MacroFab is a digital platform for electronics manufacturing. We have a network of factories that fan out all across America. When we say digital platform, what we mean is that our customers really can consume manufacturing as a cloud resource. They can upload their design files to us. We have customers that don't even have to talk to salespeople. They can get instant price quotes and use our online supply chain tools to get quotes, place orders, see the progression of those orders as those orders are being produced in our factory network. And at this point, we have about 75 factories in US, Canada, and Mexico available to us. You know, the unique thing about our service, and this is something that's been a change since last time we talked to you, Eric, is that we've been doing more and more full turnkey jobs. We started our life with a company that was focused very much on the engineers, and originally the objective was to enable engineers to source PCB assemblies without having to talk to a sales team and really place orders online. But in the last couple of years, we've had customers use our platform more and more for production and reshoring, nearshoring. The engineers become the initial champions of the approach, but they very quickly realize, you know, we can really gain benefits from this approach in multiple ways. We get for a lot of customers, they want access to a lot of factories. They would like to make sure that that's part of their resiliency plan, to make sure they're not single sourced. With MacroFab, they actually can do that and use our digital platform to tap into over 75 factories, right? So there a lot of their supply chain risk is mitigated. So as you can imagine, the last 12 months have been a roller coaster for us. We exited the COVID momentum and ran right into growth because a lot of customers were struggling to meet the demand as their economy started to move down. So it became a really good time to go tell our story of just digitizing the supply chain, but also just getting product out to customers faster. And this time built closer to those end users. For a lot of our customers, they spent many years doing simple things like getting in a plane and flying to China to meet their suppliers. Well, that's no longer possible. So just like Zoom really made it possible for people not to have to leave their house, but still get work done, we're doing the same thing for our customers as well.
Yeah, that's excellent. And what I've always liked about your model is it's, you know, it's a win on both sides, right? I mean, you essentially aggregate the unused capacity in the industry. And so you're not competing with those EMS, you're helping the EMS, and at the same time, you're helping the OEMs who have the need. So it's you're not taking from the EMS in order to serve the OEM.
That's exactly right. And this is one of the things we know empirically, but recently we worked with New Venture Research to go deeper into this topic. They actually survey a lot of factories out there. And then this is, you know, just the numbers are interesting. A lot of people assume most manufacturing capacity is in Asia. Well, that's not exactly the case. In fact, it's about a $500 billion market, so $580 billion. About 1/4 of that is in North America. There's about 2,200 factories in the North American continent. But what's consistent across all those factories is that they're only 60% utilized. So on average, there's always, I mean, we did the math, and that amounts to about almost $30 billion in underused manufacturing capacity. So we've actually had a surprising number of customers come to us and say, you know, even if I'm paying 7 to 8% more than China, I'm actually willing to go do that if I can do it in either US or Mexico because it's closer to my customers.
Yeah.
And that built in North America message is actually resonating with their customers. Even in the consumer space, we saw just today there was an announcement that Exxon allowed two activist shareholders become board members, which I assume is going to have, they're going to have primarily an environmental view. We're seeing the exact same thing happening with manufacturing. So like you said, we are helping both our customers, but obviously the factories as well. We become a source of additional jobs, and especially during heavy turbulence, we help keep people employed. We have a lot of factories that are saying, look, I'm going to go build another line because I'm sourcing a good amount of my business at this point from MacroFab. And that's, usually the SG&A stack in tier 3 through 5 manufacturing is about 15%. So we let them go grow business without having to go hire additional sales headcount, additional marketing resources. It really is a win on both sides.
And you've mentioned it a few times in there that you don't have to speak, the OEM doesn't necessarily have to speak to a salesperson, and that could be seen as a very desirable characteristic of the platform, right? They don't have to deal with that. They can just kind of pick and choose as they need it.
That's right. And, that's been a lesson over the last couple of years. The engineers don't want to talk to anyone, right? Ideal day in the life of an engineer is answering a couple of tickets, mostly spend their time hacking, listening to a couple of podcasts. And frankly, they want to be able to make decisions and have those be captured digitally so they don't have to. We just did a recording yesterday of our podcast, and the consensus from the engineering side was, I don't mind talking, I hate repeating myself, and they think with us mortals, they have to repeat themselves a lot. But on the supply chain side, it's different, right? Supply chain side needs humans in the loop. And in fact, we've been building out a sales team. We have a program management team and a supply chain and sourcing team because, you can do a lot digitally, but at the end of the day, this is still a fairly complex product set that we're helping people do. When they're moving millions of dollars in production to us, that requires people to be involved. So the objective for us is to, transform their experience, digitally enable it at every stage. But it doesn't necessarily mean a maniacal focus on removing humans at every stage. It means letting humans be much more effective, right? And I think that's going to be our approach long term. I think it's going to be a combination of people and software.
Hey, you mentioned in there too previous about the reshoring. You threw it out there. It's a big topic in the industry. I'd imagine that the platform and the data that you were referencing there, 60% capacity utilization in North America. Are you seeing that on your platform in the last year, kind of business transitioning back over from elsewhere?
Yeah, I would say the largest customers are very much reshoring jobs, and it's interesting the way they make their decisions. Our assumption was that if they leave Asia, they're going to need a low-cost manufacturing region. So Mexico is going to be the right place for them. But that's not exactly. It's not exactly that cut and dry. In fact, at least the customers we deal with, they have a very diverse product catalog. They have multiple SKUs in them. What they really enjoy is the ability to seamlessly say, if it's a smaller order and a smaller production run, US is faster, and in some cases has different responsiveness profiles. Sometimes it's privacy concerns. So what they really enjoy is having a single platform where they can either go to Mexico or US or Canada in some cases. There is excise duties, and there's kind of a fairly complex tariff picture that isn't necessarily all related to the trade war. Sometimes it makes more sense for people to produce in Canada because that's where most of the customers are. So, so it has been, when we talk about reshoring, we've really seen it to North America at large, and we see those jobs landing in US and Canada alongside of Mexico, right? It really depends on volume, their tolerance for lead times, and we've also seen US manufacturers be competitive with some of the lower overhead Mexico counterparts because minimum order quantities are lower, so they're more agile. And there's some companies that just don't know how much demand they're going to have, right? They would prefer to build to order as opposed to build to inventory. And in those cases, US manufacturing a lot of times is better. And we let customers drive those decisions, right? We actually have, startups are notorious for kind of misjudging their demand. We had a startup that went from design phase to Mexico because they thought they're going to go, very high volume. Ended up being a mid-volume customers, and they actually themselves precipitated a move to US because it was a better fit for them, right? So it's been really interesting. Once you flatten the world and you make everybody accessible through the internet, all of a sudden it doesn't look so monolithic anymore. It's not like you're making this 5-year decision where you're going from US to Mexico and the ship has sailed. There's a lot of optionality, right?
Okay. And one other question before I want to talk about the funding that you just did as well, but before I do that, regarding the solution, do your customers who use the platform also leverage supply chain tools or purchasing tools that are beneficial to them? Or
MacroFab becomes their supply chain team. So, to them, we look like an EMS company, right? We have engineering teams, we have a supply chain team. So they rely on us for sourcing. They have online tools that they use with us because, you ask any customer with any EMS, what drives you crazy? And they'll usually say it's inventory, right? I have no idea how much inventory I have in progress being worked on. I don't know how much of it is on a shelf somewhere. I don't know what my exposure is. And especially when the supply chain is tight, there's always never-ending confusion about how many parts do I have, right? So these are actually all functions that are managed through our platform, right? So in fact, with most orders, it's not as simple as saying we're going to go source all the parts. Customers consign a good amount of their materials, and they have their own supply chain teams. What's important is that we give them that access and that visibility through our platform, so they can see online. Here are the SKUs we have for all the parts. Here's how many of them we have currently in a warehouse, and we can warehouse that for them. We've never done this before, but recently we have customers saying, look, if you see this part, buy it before I even need it, and I'll pay you to warehouse it because I need it. I know I'm going to consume it, right? Yeah. So things are getting more complex from that perspective. What we haven't seen are customers that have, PLM systems that they're actively using. We have some customers with PLM systems, but it's almost like a kabuki dance of, PLM management. They use them, but only because they're forced to use them. But if you ask them, well, you use a PLM to reflect all of your product changes in them, but your factories, they sometimes make changes to the product as well. What do? We're like, well, we kind of have this sweeping function. We force them to go sync them with the PLM once every 6 months or so. So it's very clear that the records of what's actually being built, they're much more alive and agile than a typical PLM system can manage. And we don't bill ourselves as a PLM, but we certainly have customers that are centralizing on our platform for all of the build details, right? So we become the central repository for what is the product we're building? Because for us, it's essential for us to put that product on every factory floor. We have to make sure that it's the same product landing on any factory floor anywhere, right?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for that. I always love hearing about how it works and all that. So let's get to your news this week. Your news this week was that you announced a $15 million round of financing. So congratulations on that. Ask a few things about that and maybe start kind of big picture. Do you think that this shows that kind of the industry is kind of ready now for your solution, and that people like the investors and partners and customers all believe that now it's scalable, right? It's not a niche thing.
Yeah, this is our Series B. We raised about $15 million prior to this round, and this round adds another $15 million. Usually Series B is, especially with Edison partners, Edison is not an early stage firm. They usually do early growth, right? So, the stage when they get involved is where the business model is fully baked. We may not make money yet, but we know how we're going to make money. So the unit economics are understood. What they're investing really into is that they believe in the secular trends, right? The fact that there's going to be reshoring, there's going to be digitization of this industry, and what the company needs is growth capital, and that's essentially what we plan to use this capital for. It's primarily expansion of the model that we've proven up over the last couple of years. So I don't expect radical shifts from what we've talked about. I do expect us to build more of it, right, and make it more real. And in that sense, it was really exciting to see Altium join the round, and
Yes.
that happened fairly late in the process, but also very quickly because I give them a lot of credit for. There's a lot of EDA companies out there. Siemens, obviously owns Mentor Graphics. We have a close relationship with Autodesk, but I think the entire industry is trying to figure out what is the next step, right? What is the next set of capabilities we're going to go enable? I think Altium is being very aggressive into saying, look, the future is not just design; it's the design plus manufacturing, and they plan, to be very active in the supply chain and manufacturing world. They believe that really what sets them apart. So from that perspective, our missions were aligned, and it was very quick conversation. You could tell that we're speaking from the same sheet of music, and I think we may not build the same technologies, but I think they're directionally, we're all going to the same terminal point 10 years from. It made a lot of sense for us to work with them.
No. And thank you for that. I was going to ask you about Edison Partners, and you just naturally kind of covered that there about who they are and that they're not early stage. So this is in some sense a validation there as well. And Altium I found is interesting as a strategic partner. So I mean, is this going to then allow you to grow stronger on the into the design process? And how do you see that that collaboration?
Yeah, we've actually been working with Altium for some time because they own Octopart. And as you remember, when you're in our platform and you're a self-service user, for example, you get real-time access to the supply chain information. You know how many parts are available, especially, in our platform, you can choose the substitute parts, and you can go, 10 layers deep on every single component and say, here are the subs. The search interface for that, and especially the search interface for that is built by us, but the data about the availability of those parts actually comes from Octopart, which is on Altium property. So we already have a level of integration out there. We obviously expect to build more, and we've always supported Altium Designer as one of the tools that we ingest natively. But at the end of the day, right, we're still going through a translation function, right? It's almost like taking a full resolution picture and making a photocopy of it. It's not exactly at full resolution. So one of the things that our partnership is going to let us do is ingest better data, not just from Altium, but Altium has actually done a lot of work to translate that data from other EDA companies. So there's a lot of data that doesn't necessarily fit into the native Gerber format. Gerber's been around for 40, 50 years at this point, and it's a great vehicle for a lot of manufacturing data. But the further out you go on the edges of Gerber definition format, the more things get a little bit unofficial. So we're gonna get much cleaner data and much better understanding of what the design intention was through our partnership with Altium. But they also aim to extend their platform, the Altium 365, more to manufacturing use cases. So there'll be work done on that side as well. And frankly, I think that's going to happen. It all depends on what your perspective is on where things are ultimately going. I think our overall thesis is that long-term, everything looks like a cloud. We may be dealing with a physical plant and a factory, but at some point, data centers were a physical plant as well, right? Data centers 20 years ago were a bunch of telecom guys that thought data centers were racks, wires, and air conditioning, right? And at this point, data centers are demonstrably software. So I think everything's going to be a cloud resource in the future. I think to the extent to which this is where the industry is going to go, I think Altium is at the very forefront of that. Our vision on that is shared, and I would expect that more and more companies move in that direction over time.
Okay. So Misha, you have $15 million in the bank that you didn't have last week. What are you going to spend it on? What comes first? Do you have some prioritization? Is there? How do you view that?
Well, every team in the company is now lobbying for additional spending, as you can imagine. Everybody thinks that $15 million means we get to go wild and snap to our wildest dreams. But you know, here's one way to put it, right? Any company that grows at 100% or more, we're at about 100% rate. Last quarter was actually something like 147%. So the faster you grow, the more you have to hire ahead of their growth curve, because the customers don't know and don't care that you don't have the people yet in order to support them, right? They need those people to be onboarded and fully trained before their business shows up, not after. So any company that grows, I think, owes it to itself to hire more aggressively. So from that perspective, we're obviously going to hire in R&D, but we're also have been building out an engineering team that works directly with customers. Because a lot of, when you do production, you have to do testing. When you have to do testing, you have to do design for test, and you have to help customers build test fixtures. It becomes part of our production kit that goes out to every one of our factories for those production customers. So the engineering function is essential. The program management function is getting scaled out. And sales and marketing is a good portion of what we're going to be spending the money on. That's probably the biggest area of build out once you have a business model that works and you believe that you can, and it's really resonating. I mean, we just did a sales kickoff a couple of weeks ago. That's kind of a software thing. The software companies are notorious for doing sales kickoffs where they pull their people off the street for a week and say, we're going to go train and we're going to go drink and learn about what the latest offerings are. But we had one of our largest customers join the sales kickoff remotely and spent hours with us, walking us through what's important to them. And what's incredible is just how much the message is resonating with those customers. They really, not everybody, right? But there are certainly companies out there that believe that if they can tap into digital supply chain management and digital manufacturing, they can run faster. And I think one of the things they're trying to avoid is just the crunch they felt over the last couple of years, right? Especially during the pandemic. It was just way too unpredictable for a lot of supply chain managers' comfort, and it's only gotten worse since then, right? I mean, I didn't see that coming, but we're not talking. Everybody's talking about the silicon components and semiconductors. We're having constraints with copper. We're having constraints with substrates. We can't buy epoxy. So some of the consumables are disappearing. So the world expects to operate on a certain clock, and we broke the clock. So everything's out of sync, and there's going to be a lot of turbulence for a while. You can't produce more copper to meet the demand rapidly, but you can manage the process better, and you can make the people more efficient. You can digitize your approach. These are things we actually do have control over.
Yeah. I noticed in the press release too, under things, it referenced the new distribution center for international logistics. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so we have a single distribution facility right now where our headquarters are in Houston, and Houston is a great place for it because it's one of the largest ports in the world, and I think in the country somewhere with Port of Houston and LA port keep going back and forth in terms of what's the largest port. It's a large, in terms of rail network, there's a lot of rail capacity here. Yeah. So most of our materials come to Houston and then eventually find their way to the factories that are in our network. And we have about 75 factories that we work with currently. But ultimately, I think our customers are looking for more flexibility into where to move the components, right? So especially, nobody knew what to expect with the new administration coming in, right? I think half of the country expected the tariffs to be repealed, and half of the country was hoping that they wouldn't be. Well, I think they made the most pragmatic thing they should, which is they toned down the tension, but they kept the tariffs in place. Because if you're going to repeal them, you should get something in return. So I think we should expect that they're going to be out there for a while. So this next center is going to be in probably Guadalajara. We have a small team there on the ground already. but it would be really useful to us to have the facility that we can ship materials into, kit the materials locally in Guadalajara. That avoids the tariff load entirely, and we'll actually open up a QA facility in Mexico as well, because if it's produced in Mexico, and usually what our process is, customers place orders with MacroFab, we source the materials, we kit them, we deliver them to the factory floor, factory builds the product, and they ship it back to us for final inspection. Right now, all of that is done in Houston from a MacroFab side. In the future, there'll be at least another facility in Guadalajara, but we expect that we'll have more of those facilities all around the country in US as well, because especially for customers that are looking to run faster, at some point you start drawing the maps and you realize, even when you go air freight through FedEx, it takes 3 days to ship something from Houston somewhere else, right? Like other side of the country. So distribution facilities closest to the factories is something that's in our future. Amazon eventually figured out, look, the only way to do this is to just have a broadly distributed set of warehouses. We're going to end up in the same situation, because when the question comes up to how do we cut an extra couple of days out of the production cycle, that's the way to do it. You get closer to the factories.
Yeah, exactly. So your solution falls in what they call, manufacturing as a service, right? So, and it's clearly become part of the electronics industry and the landscape for the future. How far do you think this can go?
The industry that's moving faster on this front is the mechanical components market, right? So Proto Labs was there first, obviously, right? And we saw Proto Labs acquire 3D Hubs recently, and at a multiple that I think only software people usually talk about. So, congratulations to the 3D Hubs team. Xometry is very successful, and those guys never slowed down. They had a phenomenal year last year. If you read the press, and it sounds like Xometry is probably going to go public this year. So I think on the mechanical side, the digital manufacturing solutions are really growing up. Fictive is doing really well. So there's a vibrant number of companies out there. I personally don't actually think they're in competition with each other. In fact, if you roll up Proto Labs, Xometry, and Fictive, it's still smaller than, it's still a blip on a radar for that market. And I think we're going to follow the same trajectory. So MacroFab is really the only one that has a manufacturing network similar to Xometry, to where we have a number of factories that we can distribute that production capacity. There'll probably be other entrants into this space, but in terms of how big can they get, the mid-volume market in North America is about $104 billion. So right now, that's produced for mostly traditional manufacturers. I would imagine that digital models can probably command at least 20% of that market. So get to 20 to $30 billion before the momentum really slows down. Like if you look at Amazon Web Services, that's a $20 billion business growing at 50% year over year, right? This market is about, is as large and has that much room in it. And I think, we don't necessarily even have to compete with each other. I think North America is really competing with Asia for manufacturing dominance. So I think the numbers should be in the billions before we start to slow down, and before we start to run out of room and maybe really start to compete with each other in earnest. And I don't think anybody in the digital manufacturing space is even close. I don't remember exactly what the Proto Labs revenue is, but I think it's a couple of $100 million, right? It's maybe 400 or so, right? So that's not even a tier 2 EMS provider in most cases, right?
Right, exactly right. And I think you make a good point. I think that, there probably will be some new entrants into the market because the market's been effectively proved now, right? So I think that people will, as always, the fast followers is, I think, what they call that strategy. So,
we spent the last 6 months or so having a lot of conversations with people out there. What's really surprised me is that we're not the only ones who believe that we're not necessarily competitive with the rest of the world out there. In fact, I talked to a couple of people at tier one EMS companies, and they look at us as an interesting vector that maybe helps them, keep smaller customers happy and around. Because right now, you know how it goes. Customers oversell their demand to tier ones. Tier ones do their best and eventually fire those customers. When you're trying to build a relationship with any new prospective customer, firing them from your factory is not exactly the way to do it. So I think tier ones have a very healthy perspective on this. Our customers are well under $5 million each. Our products are usually smaller. So our objective is to build a tier one scale EMS business, but composed of higher margin, smaller customers. And in fact, those are the muscles that we're building. We're building a customer success team. This is one of the things that comes naturally to us because we come from the SaaS world. The last company we worked with had 4,000 customers. And part of the job in SaaS is making all those customers happy, even if some of them are smaller, right? So that's really the future for us. We're not going to follow the traditional EMS arc where you eventually start to hunt for larger customers and forget about your smaller customers. In fact, our customer average order size for engineers on a self-service side is about $5,000 per order. And then we're having, those customers are self-service primarily. They don't have to talk to us. And then for customers that need to talk to the sales team, it's anywhere between $100,000 all the way into millions of dollars. But that's still relatively small when it comes to tier one EMS providers, right? They're looking for customers that are well in excess of $10 million per product, in some cases.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, this is excellent. I'm glad to get the update today. I want to thank you and congratulate you again. It'll be interesting to see how this year plays out for you. Hopefully, maybe later in the year, we can get another update, get some time with you and see if you have any of the money left. And what's happening.
That's one of the objectives, is not to run the engine too hot and be smart about it. But this what really blows me away about the space is just there can't be enough conversation about various ways that people can solve their problems. I think that there's still a lot of education left out there. Like we had a podcast last night and Altium joined us, and the engineers on it, the guys that run the podcast, openly said, you guys are talking about a lot of DevOps concepts where engineers are more involved into manufacturing. Is that a really bad idea? And that's a really good question. Like, and I think the consensus on that, discussion was, well, it can't possibly be more broken than it is today. So we're probably not going to make too much of a mess. But at the end of the day, there's still a lot of discussion left in terms of how should this work. What role, if engineers are more involved in manufacturing decisions, in what way, how do we enable collaboration between these functions? We can't replicate exactly what the software industry has done. It's not going to work in the physical world. We have to build it a different way.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, again, Misha, thank you for the time today. Let's definitely catch up later this year. Would love to hear how this is developing. We're watching with great interest because I think it's a great addition. And like I said before, you're not competitive with the EMS or the OEM. You're kind of helping both sides, and that's what a great business case that is, right? So
great, Eric, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Have a good one.